المرسلين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه ومن استنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. Our praise be to Allah, may Allah's peace and blessings be on His last Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and on all those who follow the path of righteousness until the last day. Today we will begin the first in a series on Islamic studies covering the topics Tawheed, Tafsir, Hadith and Fiqh in order. And this order has been chosen because we know that the foundation of Islam is Tawheed. This is what determines whether a person is a Muslim or a non-Muslim in terms of stepping into the fold of Islam. And the foundation of Islamic knowledge is the Quran, and Tafsir represents the interpretation, the understanding of the Quran. And that foundation is coupled with another foundation, one is the Sunnah, the way of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and that's contained within what we call Hadith. Together, the Quran and the Sunnah, the principles within the Quran and the Sunnah make up what is known as the Sharia. And the application of that divine law, which is referred to as Sharia, according to problems and issues which occur in human life, this is known as fiqh. So this is the order that we'll be following, beginning with Tawheed, followed by the Quran, explanation, understanding, Sunnah, and finally fiqh, the application or the fundamentals for understanding how the Sharia should be applied in daily life. Before going into the concept of Tawheed, the fundamentals of it, I would just like to stress that education is something which, as Muslims, we hold in very high esteem. This is something of great importance, particularly for brothers and sisters who have come out of non-Islamic backgrounds and reverted to Islam or converted to Islam or embraced Islam, however we want to put it, and came out of a situation where the educational system was a part of the oppressive leftovers of colonialism. And living in England, that oppressive system with its racism, etc., left many people with a very negative view towards education. So many of our brothers and sisters have come into Islam having dropped out to varying degrees from the educational system which exists in the country here. And I understand naturally that when a person accepts Islam, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden they become a new person in all aspects. True, Islam is a turning point, and it is supposed to produce a new individual, the Muslim, who is supposed to be distinctly different from the kafir, the non-Muslim. However, the reality is that when we come into Islam, we usually carry with us much of what went before. So, it is very important for us to realize that Islam has put great And education, of course, begins with knowledge of what is necessary from the religion for one to be able to obey the commandments of Allah in all aspects of one's life. I mean, this is the most important aspect of knowledge. However, the other knowledge which is necessary for a Muslim to be able to function, to establish a society, is also necessary knowledge. So, it is very important that we understand that though many of us would like to go to Medina or Mecca, Egypt, Sudan, wherever, to go and study Islamic studies, the vast majority of us will not be able to go. And the vast majority of those who go will not be able to complete their studies. Because, as I have pointed out earlier, that the numbers of those people, the percentage of those people who have gone to study in the universities of Saudi Arabia, Mecca, Medina, Riyadh, the percentage of those who graduated from their studies is less than 1%. Less than 1%. So, not only is the process of going to study not an easy process, it is something that if the whole community pins all its hopes on going to study in Medina and Mecca, etc., then they will be lacking in many other vital areas which are necessary for building and establishing Islam as a real community here in England. So I would advise and encourage you brothers and sisters to advise those who accept Islam to go back into the educational system and to complete their education. Utilize the system here has provided many access courses and government-aided programs where a person can go for no cost and complete his education and go on into various fields which are necessary for the building of the community. Because the building of the community is going to require plumbers, carpenters, lawyers, doctors, all the various fields. And if we are not prepared to make those kind of sacrifices, then we're not really serious about establishing Islam. I mean, Islam is more of a fad. It's something interesting, it's fun for a while. But it's not really taken on as a way of life where we feel that this is the beginning and the end. There is nothing else. We're not serious. Because if we're really serious, then we have to have a scope, a vision, which includes the establishment of Islam as a way of life in this country. Otherwise, according to the scholars of Islam, it is haram for us to be here. If we're not about that, we're just about carrying on day-to-day lives, just to work, get food, anyhow, eat, sleep, like the animals, like the non-Muslims. If that's what we're about, then it is haram for us to be here. This includes those brothers and sisters who have migrated here to Europe, come from Bangladesh or come from Pakistan or India or wherever. They've come here. The scholars of Islam unanimous that it is haram for a Muslim to leave the country of Islam, the land of Islam, and go to the land of Kufr for the dunya, for material gain, just to eat, sleep, drink, have a good time. It is haram. Scholars are unanimous on it. So, for a person to be here, one has to have a justification for being here. That justification has to be the establishment of Islam, conveying the message of Islam to these people who don't know about Islam. If we're about that, if that is our intention, this is what we're trying. This is not just intention in terms of this is what we say, but this is reflected in our lifestyle, then we are justified in being here. Otherwise, we should not be here. Of course, realistically speaking, we know that to a large degree, the so-called Muslim countries don't open their arms and say, come, right? We have to be realistic, So we don't really have too much choice in terms of hijrah to leave here and go to a Muslim country. Things are not so straightforward. In many Muslim countries, if you call for Islam, call for the establishment of Islam, you're considered to be, some kind of enemy of the state. In Indonesia, 150 million Muslims, it is considered their treason to call for the establishment of the Islamic State. People have been executed there for calling for the establishment of Islamic law. So these are the realities of the Muslim countries. So we understand, practically speaking, we cannot go around now and say to every Muslim who is here, whether it's from Bangladesh or he's a convert, if you have to get out of here, it's haram for you to be here. No. Realize, practically speaking, there is not much choice. We don't have too many places to go, and many people cannot just pick up and leave here. So the reality is we're here. Now we have to justify our stay. In other words, we have to do what it is Allah wishes for us, wants from us here, to make our stay here blessed. Otherwise our stay will be cursed. And the basis of gaining the blessings of Allah for staying here, being present in this society, is striving to establish Islam on a personal level, on a community level, and to convey the message of Islam to the community in which we are. The other point I'd like to mention just before going into Tawheed is something concerning the naming system of Islam. Because of the fact that I've observed that many brothers, on coming into Islam, brothers and sisters, they have their names changed in a fashion which is actually not according to the Islamic system. From Yusuf Islam on down. The system of naming in Islam is based on some principles. The English system of naming used to be based on principles, but in time it has evolved and become just really your last name is the only thing of real importance to identify your family. But there was a time when the names indicated genealogy. Genealogy meaning your parents, your foreparents, who they are, etc. This is what the original naming system included. And so you found people used to be called the son of John. Son of John became John's son and eventually became Johnson. But before, in the past, people were called so-and-so, the son of so-and-so. And this is part and parcel of the Islamic naming system. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had commanded us to name ourselves according to our families, our parents' names, our fathers' names to be specific. When the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ adopted a freed slave of his by the name of Zayd ibn al-Harith, right? Zayd ibn al-Harith, and then Zayd, the son of al-Harith. His name was changed to Muhammad, so he became known as Zayd ibn Muhammad, Zayd, the son of Muhammad, until they reached Medina. When they reached Medina, then the verse from Surah Al-Ahzab, verse number 5, was revealed in which Allah said, call them by their father's name. It is more just to Allah. So the Prophet ﷺ stopped that and returned Zayd's name according to the naming of his father. And the Prophet ﷺ went on to say, in a number of hadiths, related to this, which he said, this is found in Sahih Bukhari, etc. This first one I'll mention is found in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. He who knowingly attributed his fatherhood to someone other than his real father will be excluded from paradise. He who knowingly attributed his fatherhood to someone other than his real father will be excluded from paradise. In another narration, Prophet ﷺ said, he who deliberately lets himself be called the son of someone other than his father is guilty of kufr, of disbelief. This is something serious there. The fact that the Prophet ﷺ will say that one who attributes his fatherhood knowingly to other than his father is not entering paradise. One who allows himself to be called the son of other than his father is in a state of kufr. Then this is saying that the issue of names has a particular place of importance within the Islamic system as a whole. So when we come into Islam, whether as a realization or conversion, then we try to take Islam as a complete whole, as a series of systems dealing with various aspects of our life, whether it's a system of eating, system of prayer, economic systems, etc., and the naming system also. We shouldn't be so insistent about all the other systems, but then when it comes to names, we just, anyhow, anybody do it as you please. So what happens is that, according to the Arabic naming system, which the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ approved, a person's name, the given name, was followed by the name of his father. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, his name was Muhammad ibn Abdullah. Muhammad, son of Abdullah. So when a person comes into Islam, if he chooses for himself a name, and it is not a requirement for him to change his name. It's not a requirement for a person, because you become a Muslim, you automatically must change your name. No. When many of the companions did not change their name. They came and Prophet didn't just come, everybody came and gave them a new name. No. If their names had some particularly negative meanings, ones which were particularly ostentatious, claiming for themselves things which were, not really the right of any individual, or if they had meanings which were connected with kufr, paganism, idolatry, these names were changed. So a person comes into Islam. The way the person would adjust and correct the naming system is that if his name, for example, was Michael Johnson, his father's name is Joseph Johnson. When he comes into Islam, according to the Islamic naming system, his name automatically becomes Michael ibn Joseph Johnson. He may now change Michael. He doesn't particularly want Michael. He wants to get an Arabic sounding, Islamic sounding name. So he chooses Mikhail, or Mikhail, is the Arabic version of Michael. Or he chooses Muhammad. He chooses Muhammad, his name is Muhammad ibn, the son of Joseph Johnson. This is what he says. The ibn, you can write it in or you can leave it out. When you leave it out, he is Muhammad Joseph Johnson. That is the correct system. When he has a daughter, his daughter's name, she chooses the name Fatima, for example. His daughter will be Fatima bint, if you decide to write it in, means daughter of Muhammad Joseph Johnson. I mean, if you give the daughter Fatima, if you give her the name Fatima Aisha Sophia Muhammad, a name like that, what this actually means, you see, when you give a second name after the child's name, this indicates genealogy, as I said. If you don't put the father's name there, and you put a female's name there, this usually means that the woman committed fornication. So the child is then attributed to the mother. So Aisha Fatima, for example, means, or Fatima Aisha means Fatima, the daughter of Aisha, who bore her out of wedlock. Okay. So this is the system. What you will find, of course, it doesn't become so obvious here until you go to the Middle East. You go to the Middle East into Arabic Muslim countries. When they will ask you to write your name, they'll ask you to write first, your given name. Then they'll ask for your father, then your grandfather, then the name of your family, the general name of your family. That's how they will ask. And of course, for a lot of brothers, when they go, it's a bit confusing because, that's not how you write your name. In the end, when you put all these things together, that doesn't make up the name that you're going by. So that is how it is supposed to be. That is the correct method of naming. So it is important, for those of us who feel that it is necessary for us to follow the way of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in this regard, or in all regards, that we, make this correction. Help those who are coming into Islam to realize what is the correct way, and that we correct, our names where it is possible. The word may involve a lot of money, we can't afford it at this point in time, whatever, we ask Allah's forgiveness, we did something in ignorance, we carry on, and if time permits or opportunity permits, we try to adjust it, And this thing is not just for people who just convert into Islam. Commonly in India and in Pakistan, many of these other countries, they have gone away from this system also. Because I'm sure, brother, you're somewhere, from Bangladesh, from Pakistan, right? What is your first name? Ishtaq. What is your second name? Huh? Eli. Is this your father's name? Yeah. And then what name that comes after? You just took these two. But I know a number of other people who they may have three names, but it doesn't represent, that middle name doesn't necessarily represent the father's name. Maybe a grandfather, they have different systems. The names are not following this pattern that they have identified. So I'm saying it's not just, it is something which has become widespread around the Muslim world, in ignorance. And it's something which, needs to be addressed, especially in our context here. Of course, you will find people, coming into Islam who may not want to keep this other name because, they get into a kind of a nationalist type of thing where they're saying, well, this is really the slave master's name, and from the Malcolm X days, where they put X in the place of the name, and they want to, they say, well, you see, the point is that, one, for the vast majority of us, we don't know how that name actually came about. We know, in reality, that the slave master had relations with his slaves. And this is, most of us who are various mixtures are products of those relationships. So the slave master may very well be the great grandfather, whether you like it or not. This is the reality, you see. So it's not worth trying to get into arguments and knocking yourself out about, right? The reality is that your father, what was the name that your father went by? If his name was, Joseph Johnson, that's your father's name. Now, you are the son of Joseph Johnson, regardless of how Johnson came about, generations back. That's not significant. What's significant here is that your name is, you are the son of Joseph Johnson. What is the importance of this? Because the Prophet Muhammad, he told us that we should learn what, of our family trees, what is sufficient to protect the rights of inheritance and to prevent incest, marrying within the prohibited degrees. Because what is the reality here? If you decide you come into Islam, your name was Michael Johnson, and you change your name to Muhammad Kenyatta or whatever, you took some name, Now, your father, he had relations with another woman someplace else. He had a daughter. She comes into Islam. She calls herself Fatima, Fatima Muhammad. And perhaps you meet Fatima Muhammad. You could marry her. And she would be your half-sister. And that is, of course, a major sin. Whereas if you took your name correctly as Muhammad ibn, Joseph Johnson, and she chose the name Fatima bint Joseph Johnson, no chance of you marrying your half-sister. So this is where the significance comes, to protect you from falling into marriages which are prohibited, as well as identifying the rights of inheritance. When the time comes to divide up, if you die and you have to divide up inheritance, so you want to track down who are your Muslim relatives who you need to give a portion of your money to. By correct genealogy, you'll be able to determine that. Anyway, for further detail on that, the naming system, this can be found in my tafsir of Surah Hujurat in the second edition, pages 112 to 118. I've gone into it in detail, bringing all the various hadith, examples of the Prophet Muhammad change people's names, etc., etc. Now, on to Tawheed. Tawheed literally means unification, bringing things together into one. And when we use it in relationship to Allah, it does not mean that unification, as you said, unification in context of Allah, we cannot apply that literal meaning of the term Tawheed to Allah, in the sense that we do not consider Allah to be three who is united into one, where we could have this process taking place. But no, what we consider, we use the term Tawheed here, it really means maintaining the unity of Allah in our relationship with Allah. The things that we do, which are various aspects of worship that we do for the sake of Allah. Our concept of the world around us, the people, when we look at the world, when we look at our existence, we look at it within the context of the unity of Allah, that Allah is one. And for the purpose of analysis of this concept of Tawheed, and I should mention that when the Prophet Muhammad sent Mu'adh ibn Jabal to Yemen, as the governor of Yemen, he told him that you will be coming to a people who are from the people of the book. And the first thing that you should call them to is the oneness of Allah. So this is where da'wah starts from. This is the foundation. He said if they accept that, then tell them about Salah. You go on stage by stage. So it means that even when we look in terms of da'wah, when we're trying to convey the message of Islam to non-Muslims, then it's very essential for us to get to this point. first it may be difficult, you may not be able to start from that point in conversation. Because most people, if you start talking, guess what? Allah is one. I mean, they don't want to listen, they don't want to talk about religion or whatever. So you may start a conversation with something else, something else which is attractive to them, which is interesting to them, whatever. But what you try to do is to steer that conversation to that point of realization of the oneness of Allah and man's relationship to Allah. So, for the purpose of analyzing these concepts, scholars have divided the field of Tawheed into three aspects. Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, literally meaning maintaining the unity of Lordship. Tawheed al-Asma' wa Sifat, maintaining the unity of Allah's names and attributes. And Tawheed al-Ibadah, maintaining the unity of worship. Now, the scholars made this breakdown of Tawheed for the purpose of presenting a logical and systematical rebuttal for those people who had begun to deviate from the correct concept of Tawheed in Islam. I mean, you won't find this breakdown amongst the Sahaba. Because in the time of the Sahaba, there was very little deviation in terms of concepts. Towards the end of the time of the Khulafa, Rashidun, the righteous caliphs, these deviations started to enter into the body of Muslims. As Islam spread into Syria and into India, into Egypt, etc., people who accepted Islam, some of them brought in with them some of the previous concepts which they have, as Christians or as Zoroastrians or as Hindus or whatever. They brought these things in with them. Some people, many people brought it in with them. As they grew in Islam, these were removed. Other people who were, very philosophical in their approaches, they sometimes wanted to maintain these concepts and to give them an Islamic cloak, felt they were still valid, and to try to put them in Islamic terms. And they tried to express these. When they tried to express these, the early caliphs used to, where people complained against these people were banished or they were executed or whatever. They wouldn't allow it to take place. However, as the Umayyad state dynasty became more and more corrupt, then the concern of the caliph of maintaining purity of ideology was not so great, and so you found more and more people who would arise and make statements concerning Allah and concerning man, etc., which were deviant. And it then became the duty of the scholars of that time to refute these ideas, to defeat them, using the Quran and Sunnah in a logical and acceptable fashion which would convince the masses of the people. And it is out of that process, that effort to combat these deviant ideas, that the science of Tawheed arose. And the scholars broke the system down into various groupings. This breaking it down into three is just one possible breakdown. Some people break it into two, some may break it into four. The numbers are not critical. We don't let's not think that this breakdown is the only possible breakdown. This is just one breakdown which was used by a number of scholars. The first category which I refer to as Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, or the unity of Lordship, this refers to the acceptance of Allah as being the only source of power in the universe. When we say La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, there is no movement nor power except by Allah's will. We are affirming this. The term Rabb, from which Rububiyyah comes, literally means Lord, the creator, the sustainer, the one who looks after, Rabbul Alameen. And what this The first, when we talk about Tawheed or Rububiyyah, is that whatever happens, whatever takes place in the life of a man, this is by the wish and the will of Allah. That is, we don't attribute it to anything other than Allah. When we talk about Qada and Qadar, the destiny, this is an expression of this aspect of Rububiyyah. Whatever takes place is as Allah wills. This means then that good fortune and misfortune are according to the destiny of Allah. We don't attribute good fortune and misfortune to anything other than Allah. When we do so, we commit shirk in this aspect of Tawheed. And this is something, very widespread in our Western society, wherein people talk about lucky numbers, lucky this and lucky that, bad luck in this way and that way and the other way, In England it may vary to some degree from, what I know in America, but most of the things are quite similar. I know in America, for example, you would be hard-pressed to find an apartment building which has a 13th floor. You go up, the elevator will say 12, 14, 11, 12, 14, 15. I don't know what it is that 14 is very 13, but they renamed it 14. When you go down the street, you're hard-pressed to find a house with number 13 on the block. It'll go 12, 12A, 14, but you won't find 13. Hard-pressed to find it. And
that gets to for half an hour.
Sure. What the reason for this may be not necessarily that everybody who does this believes that 13 is a bad luck number. Some people, like you may approach an owner of an apartment building and ask them, why you don't have 13? He'll tell you, because if I had a 13th floor, nobody would rent on it. So just practically speaking, he's dealing with economics. If he has a floor number 13, he found nobody renting on it, so he called it 14 people renting. So on the basis of that, he goes with 14, But, in fact, this concept is really deeply embedded into the society to such a degree that I remember reading in the newspaper, interviewers, there was an Apollo moon shot, back in the 60s, late 60s, that had gone off for the moon, but something had gone wrong with their steering mechanism and it looked like they were going to miss the moon. They're going to go flying off into space. And for the Americans, this was a big tragedy. For the Russians, they had people going off into space all the time. It didn't matter, Russian people are expendable. So they would try all kinds of things, send people off into space, and be crying, help us, That's it. Whereas for Americans, for one person to die in a space mission is a big, embarrassment. So the whole American society is very upset and worried and so forth. In this case, they managed to fiddle around and use they had a lunar lander. They used the retro rocket from it to change the course of the ship so it was able to catch the gravitational pull of the moon and come back to the Earth. They had to abort the mission. They couldn't go to try and land on the moon. They just came back to Earth, flashed down. So after they picked up the people out of the ocean, brought them to Cape Canaveral, they got off the plane, they're walking down. He put his van up to the captain who was the head of the mission, asked him, how do you feel? So, they're waiting for his first impression. He said, I should have known it was going to happen. It was surprising. He said, I should have known. I said, how should you have known? He said, because this was Apollo 13. This now is a man who's got a PhD in, astrophysics, and, he's telling them that he should have known because it was Apollo 13. It took off at 1300 hours at 1 o'clock. On Friday the 13th. All those 13s coming together, man, that was like a doomed mission, as far as he was concerned. So this is just showing you how deeply rooted these concepts of shirk and, are embedded in the society. And it is important for a Muslim that he or she, when they come into Islam, root these things out. Because for sure, when we come into Islam, it doesn't mean automatically whatever you believe before of these omens, etc., is automatically God. You may still find yourself crossing your finger, knocking on the wood, and these kind of things. Just, inadvertently, you're still doing these things. So it is very important that the Muslim go back into their practices, etc., and clean this up. Put one's trust on Allah alone, knowing that one's destiny is by Allah. Whatever happens in life, good or evil. The second major area of Tawheed is known as Tawheed al-Asma wa Sifat. Unity, or maintaining the unity of Allah's names and attributes. And I should mention before going into that in Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, this Tawheed is also destroyed by the practice of amulets, the use of amulets. Now, this is another area now which maybe for convert Muslims is not so much of an issue, but for Muslims coming from various parts of the Muslim world, the use of amulets is very common. People have what they call Tawheed and different things that they tie around their arms, around their necks, around their waist of the babies, and this type of thing. They believe to protect them from misfortune. And people have even taken the Quran and turned it into a charm. In that, people will write the Quran on posters, or put it on the wall, or on jewelry, and they wear it around their necks, believing that by putting this verse in the Quran on your wall, or by wearing it on your neck, it's going to protect you from evil. When a person does that, they're using the Quran like a charm, an amulet, something which is prohibited. And said, whoever has worn a charm, a tongue around one's neck, they've committed shirk. And you'll find, I remember reading about, I think it was in Bahrain, some person there, they bought this Quran, which was only 2¼ inches by 3¼ inches, and they said, this is the smallest Quran in the world. And the more somebody in India came, no, we have one here which is 1¾ inches by 1½ inches. And you see these Qurans are written in letters so small you cannot see it with the naked eye. You have to use a microscope to read it. So the intention of the person who is doing this Quran, who's using this Quran, is nothing but using it as an amulet. These are ended up put inside of lockets. People wear these lockets around their necks. They believe it's going to protect them from Allah, from evil. And this is, in fact, a form of shirk. People may do this with zikr beads, for example. You see people who have zikr beads, and after, making zikr or whatever, they rub the beads, they blow on them, they do all kinds of things. They carry these beads, they hang it in their cars, they believe these zikr beads now because having done zikr with these beads, somehow it has special barakah and powers which will protect them from evil. This is shirk. Now, Tawheed al-Asma wa Sifat, we could say basically means maintaining Allah's unity with regards to His names and His attributes in such a way that we only refer to Allah according to the way in which He and His Messenger have referred to Him. We don't make up any attributes to describe Allah. Similarly, if Allah has described Himself in a particular way, via His Messenger, we don't try to reinterpret it in such a way as not to mean what it obviously states. We don't play around with the names. Allah calls Himself, this is what we refer to Allah by. It also means that we don't give Allah's names and attributes to anyone, nor do we give human names and attributes to Allah. And this is the area which is probably the most critical. Giving Allah human attributes. This is where the Jews went astray. When we look at the different people of the book, Christians and Jews, Jews maintain unity of Allah in the sense that they say that Allah is one. However, the way they describe Allah in the Quran, in the Old Testament, they have described him in such a way that he is like a human being. They describe him as, being sad, sorry. They describe him as repenting for things which he did. They describe him in the Genesis as walking in the garden and Adam hearing his footsteps. They're describing him as calling out to Adam, "Where are you? Where are you?" There's no where Adam is. Adam is hiding behind the tree, can't see Adam. This is all making Allah like a man. And the Christians, they went astray in giving a man Allah's attributes. They turned Jesus into Allah, to God. They gave him the attributes. He will judge. He is the creator. So they gave him the attributes of God to Jesus, made him into man, and made him into God. And you also find amongst the Shiites, this is where the Shiites deviated also, and that they gave the Imams the attributes of Allah. As Muhammad Rida al-Muzaffar wrote in his book called The Faith of Shia Islam, page 32, he says, "We believe that like the Prophet, an Imam must be infallible. That is to say, incapable of making errors or doing wrong, either inwardly or outwardly, from his birth to his death, either intentionally or unintentionally." And total infallibility. This belongs only to Allah. Human beings are fallible, they make errors. Elsewhere in the book, he goes on to say, "We maintain that the powers of the Imams to receive inspiration has reached the highest degree of excellence, and we say that it is a divinely given power. By this, we mean the Imam is able to understand information about anything, anywhere, and at any time. He is able to understand information about anything, anywhere, and at any time." Now, this is omniscience, total knowledge. This belongs only to Allah. And this is the sense of which the Shiites, the main body of Shiites, which are known as the Ithna Ashariyas or the Ja'fari Shiites, most of these are those of Iran, they deviated. The Shiites of Yemen, known as the Zaydis, they do not hold these beliefs. And because of that, they are not considered to have deviated from mainstream Islam with regards to Tawheed. The ones of Yemen, Zaydites, Zaydis, in Arabic, Zaydi. And as an example, because I mentioned this thing of repentance of God amongst the Christians, just to give a particular reference, so you don't say this on the Christian afterwards. Where is it? Okay, in the Holy Bible, we call Holy Bible, Exodus 32, verse 40, it states, "And the Lord repented of the evil which he sought to do, to his people. And of course, we know about the statement in Genesis 2:2, in which it said, "And on the seventh day, God finished his work, which he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all his work, which he had done." He needs rest. Get tired. This human being. This area also, when we go into studies, we find that in the area of analysis, we may find that in the course of Western science, because of the fact that they have sought to explain human existence without having to resort to God, that they will give some of God's attributes now to his creation. They describe the creation in terms of Allah. So you find, for example, in this very famous statement that is used to describe the theory of relativity of Einstein, E equals mc squared. E equals mc squared. This is explained as energy equals mass times the square of the speed of light. And in words, they say this means that mass can neither be created nor destroyed. Mass turns into energy, energy turns into mass. So something if you get into physics, whatever, you must memorize this formula, and you must repeat this formula on your examination. However, these formulas are certainly a shirk. Because when you say that matter or mass or energy cannot be created, and you're saying there is an uncreated being in existence because Allah. Allah is the only being who is uncreated. And it cannot be destroyed, meaning it has no end. It is only Allah. Only Allah has no end. Allah has no beginning to the end. Everything else, matter, energy, was created by Allah and no end. So knowing we have to learn this formula, repeat it because we have to pass the exam, we understand inside of ourselves that there is a conditional statement which we must add to that. That energy can either be created or destroyed by man. We add that. They may not want you to write on the exam, but you write it down, you have in your mind. By man. It's true. By man. You can't create it. The last category is that of Tawheed al-Ibadah, or the maintaining unity of worship. It is also called Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah. And this refers to ensuring that all worship is directed to Allah alone. And the Prophet Muhammad said that dua is worship. Dua, calling on one in prayer, is worship. So it means that we are not allowed to call on anyone besides Allah. For many of us, it may be quite obvious. But when you go around the Muslim world, it's not so obvious. Because you find Muslims who will be calling for faith. When times of difficulty come, they will call out on Abu Qadir, Al-Jilani, Muhyiddin, Ibn Arabi. They call on these people to protect them, to save them. And it's just like the Christians who the saints, Catholics particularly, and the Anglicans too, who have a series of saints. Who they call on? They have a saint. If you're going on a journey, you have Saint Joseph, Saint Christopher. One Saint Jude, Saint this one, Saint that one. So different occasions, different problems that you're facing. You pray to this saint, you pray to that saint, you pray to the other saint, and they are supposed to help you. Islamic answer to shirk. And what happens in this process of shirk actually is also shirk in Tawheed al-Asma wa Sifat. Because when you ask people who pray to saints or pray to intermediaries to talk to Allah, usually they try to explain why they do so by saying to you, if you want to go and see the Queen, now you can't just go up to, the Buckingham Palace, bang on the gate and say, I want to see the Queen. They walk in. No. You have to go and see somebody else, and make a connection with so-and-so, and arrangements are made, You go to a series of intermediaries before you can get audience with the Queen. And they say, sir, you, as human beings, are dirty with sin. How do you think you can go and stand before Allah and call on Allah directly? You're simply covered with dirt, you're dirty with sin. If you want to reach Allah, you must go through a person who is close to Allah. One who is pure. He says, so we pray to this text. The first prayer to Muhammad Sallallahu we pray to Allah, your prayer get answered. You see? In ignorance, the person like here, it's quite logical. It's the same thing. If you think they're doing the same thing. But when they do this, what they're doing is, they're making Allah like human beings. Where Allah has said that there's nothing like Him. He said, "Ud'uni astajib lakum." Call on me and I will answer. When you say, "Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in," so you say, "You alone do you worship, and from you alone do you seek help." Direct, without any intermediary. This represents, a brief introduction to these three aspects of Tawheed. And if you want to read, and you should read in more detail on it, and also in, shirk, how shirk occurs in these aspects, you could read in the book Fundamentals of Tawheed, which are written from page 1 to page 26, which covers the categories of Tawheed, and from 27 to 42, which covers the way in which shirk occurs in these aspects of Tawheed. Now, there are some issues related to Tawheed and shirk, which are of important for us to understand because of the fact that it is so widespread in the society. I spoke to a certain degree about omens, charms, amulets. So that's the area concerning fortune telling. Because you can hardly pick up a newspaper without finding a section, where the fortune teller tells you, if you're a Virgo or you're a, Pisces or you're this or that, this is what you can do today or don't do tomorrow. Many people get involved in reading up on these things. And it's important to realize that this is a form of shirk in Tawheed al-Asma wa Sifat. That Allah alone knows the future. And when we turn to people to tell us the future, to identify for ourselves what is going to be good or what is going to be bad, we are giving the attributes of Allah to human beings. And it's a shirk. But Muhammad said that whoever goes to a fortune teller, just go, question. Not necessarily believing, just sure. That person's salah is not accepted for 40 days. Serious. It doesn't mean because your salah is not accepted for 40 days that you say, okay, khalas, no more salah, I won't buy the prayer for 40 days. No. You still have to pray. Because when a person makes salah, the salah provides two things. One it removes the obligation of the prayer from the individual, and two, depending on the degree of concentration, etc., he earns a reward or she earns a reward for himself or herself. So, what has been removed from the salah is the reward. You will pray for those 40 days, but there's no reward, because if you give up prayer, then you fall into a greater sin. It's called the kufr. And when you go and ask for fortune teller, if you're saying today, you don't necessarily go and ask, you can pick up the newspaper and you read. When you do that, that's equivalent to going and ask for a fortune teller. You also have certain programs on computer known as the bioreasoning program, for example. You can get bioreasoning, which will predict your future for you. And it is a fortune telling program. To get that program to use it is committing sin. Someone says, the Imam is saying that whoever goes to a fortune teller and believes in what the fortune teller has said, and disbelieves in what he does, now becomes kufr. Believing in what the fortune teller tells us becomes an act of kufr. It doesn't mean that this person, if you see one of the brothers going to a fortune teller, you kill him out and kill him. No, this is an act of kufr that is committed, right? I mean, he needs to turn back to Allah and repentance, to remove the severity of the sin there. If he continues, then it can ruin his faith totally. Another area which is of importance to know concerning as far as the self is that of what is known as transcendency, or the attribute known as al-ulu, Allah being above and beyond His creation. This is important because of the fact that most people, either coming out of a Christian background or most people in the Muslim world, have been mistakenly led into the concept that Allah is everywhere. Most people you ask them, where is Allah? They say, Allah is everywhere. Allah is in my heart, in your heart, etc. When in fact, this is contrary to the Islamic view. This view, Allah being everywhere, is the foundation for the practice of the pagans. If you go to a Hindu and you ask a Hindu, why are you praying to this statue? Don't you believe in one God? The Hindu will say, yes, I believe in one God. What? Who is everywhere? And I believe that one God is manifested. So I'm not worshipping the statue that you see, the bowl, the stone, or the copper, or the whatever. I'm worshipping God who is manifesting the statue. This becomes the philosophy of paganism. Whereas Islam has prohibited us from bowing down to creation, from worshipping creation. And of course, this is the aggressive teaching. They say we worship Jesus, but Jesus is God. The Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. The Son is the Father, and the Holy Ghost, as the Father is the Son. The so-called mystery, divine mystery. That's what they do. This is the rationale. Jesus will worship Jesus because Jesus is God. God was manifested to us. Was Jesus a man? Most of us say yes, Jesus was a man. But God was present in him. So we're worshiping not the man side of Jesus, but the God side. This is the rationale. But it's deviation. Because what is the difference between them saying they're worshiping the God side of a man and Hindus worshiping the God side of an idol? That's just qualitative. One is idol, one is a man. But in the end, this one's worshiping a man, the other one's worshiping an idol. And the ultimate proof for this is the validity of the position that Allah is not a part of His creation. There are many different arguments, which can be brought to prove it. And this can be found in the book Fundamentals of Tawheed, page 114 to 116. 135, right? But the ultimate truth really is the truth from the statement of the Prophet Muhammad. Because in the end, one may interpret verses of one way, one may, argue logically another way, but in the end, what determines right and wrong in terms of these type of issues is what did the Prophet Muhammad say. And there is a hadith, which is in Tawheed, Muslim, volume 1, in English translation, pages 271 to 272, hadith number 1094, in which Muawiyah bin al-Hakam said, Muawiyah, one of the companions of the Prophet, he said, I had a servant girl who used to tend my sheep in the area of Mount Suffolk, near a place called Al-Juwariyah. One day I came to see them, only to find that a wolf had made off with a sheep from her flock. Since I, like the rest of Adam's descendants, am prone to be neglectful acts, I gave her a terrible slap on the face. When he did that, he realized that automatically that he'd done wrong, because Prophet had prohibited us from hitting even an animal. It is haram to hit a dog, much less another human being. So after doing that, he decided to go to Prophet to try to find some way of atonement for the error that he committed. So anyway, he told the Prophet what happened. He said to the Prophet after telling him, O Messenger of Allah, can I see her? He replied, bring her to me. So I brought her. He then asked her, where is Allah? Now, Prophet is trying to determine whether this girl is a true believer or not, so that she may be freed as an act of atonement for the Sahabi who sat her in the faith. The first question he asked her was, where is Allah? Now, we would say logically what you should be asking her is, do you believe in Allah? Is that the logical question? First, do you believe in Allah? He didn't ask her, do you believe in Allah? Why? Because the Arabs at that time, they believed in Allah. In general, they believed in Allah. That they had intermediaries between themselves and Allah. They had all these idols around the Kaaba, etc. Believing that somehow these would bring them closer to Allah, or Allah was manifesting these idols, these type of things. So he wanted to find out whether she had a clear concept with regards to where Allah was. Whether Allah was inside of these idols, or the Kaaba, or wherever. So he asked her, where is Allah? And she replied, above the sky. Then he asked her, who am I? And she replied, you are Allah's messenger. So he said, see her, for verily she is a true believer. So this is the question. This is the correct answer with regards to where is Allah. Allah is not inside of His creation. And what you find is that this is a common view when you go around the various sects around the world, deviant, religious sects, etc. Even those who break off from Islam, mostly Sufis, etc. When you have people like Al-Hallaj, who claim that, when he said, I have Allah. And then they put him into a court and they tried him, to say, look, you got to put this back, otherwise you're going to have to die. According to your Allah, he stood up and he opened up his cloak and he said, there's nothing inside of this cloak except Allah. What else is it? Ibn Arabi, he wrote poetry. He claimed that, Allah is in you, Allah is in me. Why bother to pray to anyone outside of you? This is the idea of Allah everywhere. So, the correct Islamic view that Allah is beyond His creation, it's not inside of His creation. Not that He is not capable of controlling the creation. Of course, He's capable, He controls the creation. He knows all that goes on in the creation. He has power over the whole thing. But He does not have to be inside His creation for Him to control. Because when you think of Him in that way, then you make Him like a human being. If you want to know what's going on in this room, you have to be in the room. He's a human being. Not all. So, this briefly sums up concepts concerning Tawheed. That Allah is the sole power in the universe. He controls, creates, sustains everything. All good, all evil comes from Him. At the same time, He has described Himself for us to know Him, and we understand and know Him through these terms by which He has described Himself. We do not attempt to create an image of Allah in our mind. No, Christians will ask, well, if you don't have an image of Allah, how do you think Allah? What do you think? What picture comes to your mind? No, you don't have any picture. If you create an image in your mind, when you're praying, if you have an image of Allah in your mind, then you're deviated. Because Allah has said, like a mystery thing, there's nothing like it. If any image that you create in your mind will be different from what Allah is. It can't be. It will be made up from the things of His creation. However, you conceive of Allah, you can conceive of Him in terms of images, in terms of, a spirit. You have an idea of a spirit is a smoky light. What do you eat? Like smoke. However, our minds are only able to perceive and create images of things which we have seen, we have observed. And Allah is not observable. We don't see it. So, we are not allowed to make an image of it. And also, we don't give Him the attributes of His creation. We also don't give the creation His attributes. And worship is directed only to Allah. In summary, I would say that the Islamic view of Allah, and it is important for us to understand that the term God may be used to refer to Allah. I know some brothers have made it an issue. No, we can't say Allah is God because God is, like some people say God is God spelled backwards. I was trying to say it, okay? But the point is that God, according to the English language, means the object of worship. And Allah has described Himself as Al-Ilah, which is God. Allah is His name, but Al-Ilah is one of His attributes, which is translated as God. So it is perfectly okay to refer to Allah as God. And when we give da'wah to Christians, we try that. You're worshipping God, or you are supposed to be worshipping God. Well, the God that you're supposed to be worshipping is the one that we actually worship. Right? We both agree that God is the one who should be worshipped. It's something we can agree on. We Christians, and we can put them with this. God is the one who should be worshipped. But the difference between us and you is that we actually worship God, and we don't. You say you're worshipping God, but in fact you're worshipping Jesus. That's the difference. In terms of Tawheed and Ibadah. They worship Jesus, believing that He is God, they're giving Him the attributes of God, and we alone worship God. This is what distinguishes us from all of the other religions and sects. That we alone actually worship God. Because all of the others claim to worship God. Even the Hindus, believe it or not, everybody else claims God worshiping a tree, a stone, a star. They all say we're worshiping God. But it's only in Islam that we actually worship God. And the truth, so this is a distinction you can make for da'wah purposes. This is what we make for them. We help them to come to that realization. We agree that God is the one who should be worshipped, but let us look and see, what are you actually worshipping? Are you worshipping God? Now Jesus, you worship who? When Jesus is recorded in the Gospel that He was praying. Who was He praying to? If He was God, was He praying to Himself? Stupidity. So it makes sense. It's illogical. Not praying to Himself. He was praying to one other than Himself. He's calling out. My Lord, my Lord. If he's the Lord, then the next sense he's calling to himself, my Lord. No. He's calling to one other than him. He is worshiping other than himself. And this was his way. He taught people to worship God. He told them to worship us. Our Father. Did he say worship? Dear Lord Jesus, who art in heaven? No, he said, our Father who art in heaven. So he said it in the word. He did it in deed. Everything that he was about was telling people to worship God. But what happened? That program got turned upside down and people ended up worshiping him. That's what happened to them. So this is what we try to bring them to that realization. This is the core of our da'wah. To make them understand that. And really they're not worshiping God. That it's only the Muslim who's worshiping God. And when they say to you, Jesus said, no one cometh to the Father except by me. He said, we agree. The followers of the Prophet could only go to God by the way of the Prophet. By their sunnah. Going according to their way. His way was to worship God. They worshiping him. Are you following his way? No. It's described in the Gospel that he fell down on his face and prayed. Do you follow your face and pray? No. You were circumcised on the 8th day. Are you circumcised? No. You didn't eat pork. You eat pork? Yes. That's following his way. You following his way. Muslims fall on their face and pray. They get circumcised. They don't eat pork. They're the ones who follow the way of Jesus. So, that inshallah summarizes the Islamic view concerning Tawheed, that Allah is unique in all of his attributes. He is the only one worthy of worship. All good, all evil which takes place in creation is by his will. Now, inshallah, I'll give you an opportunity if you have any questions that you'd like to raise concerning this brief introduction to Tawheed.
the hadith made Allah. Does that mean what category of Tawheed would that be? Would that be under?
This would be under Tawheed al-Asma wa Sifat. Because this is one of the attributes of Allah, that he is above and beyond his creation. No questions, anything? Yeah?
So, we said that how we say, how we say that, my father said, I don't need this person, I don't like that. But, of course, that's why I thought that I was going to the point. And then I thought it was something more. So, because I said, no, nothing more. He said, that would be what I always say officially to a yes, I don't know, and then with an order to like a whole lot.
If you just wrote, for example, Abdul Noor Shaker, yes, that's enough. On your official record, if you're writing your name out officially, then that becomes, you're writing into your whole name, if necessary, you can shorten it like that. I'm just saying that this is what is on record as being your name. You are Abdul Noor, the son of Chief Shaker. If you want to just refer to yourself in normal writing, you say it's Abdul Noor, that's okay, God. But just that when you get down to it, somebody wants to, what is your full name, so on record, what is recorded, etc., your full name should be there. Muhammad Bilal literally means Muhammad, the son of Bilal. Yeah, because is your father's name Bilal? That's what it would mean. Yeah, Muhammad Yusuf is Muhammad, the son of Yusuf.
That's it.
You should correct it. The thing is, as I said, if you want to do it right, and deal with Islam, not just according to what pleases you, you deal with that much, and what don't please you, you don't deal with that much, then, yeah, that's what it would be. That's what it would be.
I checked my parents' name, but also not just Rashid. And before he started with Rashid, so Rashid understood, more than 2 million with the Islamic way. So I said Muhammad Rashid's son, my parents' name, my family's name.
Yeah, but you still have Muhammad Rashid, right? It would have been better to just keep Muhammad alone. Because once you said Muhammad Rashid, that really means Muhammad the son of Rashid. Of course, they have in Arabic what they call compound names. Where there's 2 names put together, but it never, some people have allowed it on the view and say, Muhammad Rashid is only one name. And take it that way, and then you got the family name, right? Huh? Saman. Yeah, at the end, right? But in fact, when you really look at the compound names in Arabic, it never took that form. Like Muhammad Rashid is not really a compound name. So it's better to have just taken Muhammad, and then what is your father's first name? What is your father's first name? Huh? His name was Ishmael? Yeah, okay. So your name is really Muhammad, the son of Ishmael Saman. I think this.
Why is it not related to this disrespectful to call Rashid on his own?
Huh?
Disrespectful to say Rashid on his own.
Disrespectful? So that's why you put Muhammad Rashid in. No, you could have taken Rashid by itself. Rashid is okay because Rashid is not one of the names of Allah. As people have taken the name Abdul Rashid, very common. But Rashid actually is not one of the names of Allah. Yeah. If you go and you look into the names of the men, you will not find Ar-Rashid as one of the names which Allah refers to himself. What does Rashid actually mean? Rashid means to guide. To guide, right? And truly Allah is the guide, but we are not allowed to give that name to Allah when He didn't give it to Himself. So what the name Alameen, so I heard somebody being called Alameen. Alameen. This was a title which was given to Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Al-Amin, meaning the trustworthy. No. Yeah. Yeah, Alameen is okay. This now, people have done it, right? In more recent times, people got the name Yasin and Faha and these kind of names, right? But really, this was not the practice of the early Muslims. It's not forbidden, right? We're scared to forbidden. So I would say, I would not encourage anybody to take any of those names because this was not the way of the early Muslims. Music names had meaning, but later on, people when they lost track of Arabic and it just became, the Arabic language became a baraka in itself, they fabricated the hadith which said that the language of the people of paradise is going to be Arabic, and Arabic became like a holy language. So just any piece of Arabic you take anyway, it's great, So people just put any name out of the Quran anywhere, it could mean anything and they just pick it out of the name. And then this type of thing became common. But in fact, names with good meaning. Prophet ﷺ said you should give your children good names. Good names, good meaning. Either something which linguistically has a good meaning, or it was the name of a well-known companion of the Prophet Muhammad, an Islamic figure, etc. Which is named, one way, that way or the other way. It's that way. Prophet said the best of names is, Abdullah and Abdul Rahman. That's a more than hadith. Yeah, it's not authentic. The language of the people of Paradise is Arabic. It's not authentic. It's not authentic. Yeah.
The rest of Muslim and the Muslim is now teaching us indicates what our children will have different children like, access, even access will have in the children. You can see people think that even that now access and access
yeah, this is despicable Islamically. To choose the names of the disbelievers commonly used actors, especially, movie idols, people who are not examples of righteousness, and to stick these names on. Some people, come into the West, they've modified their names. Muhammad becomes Mo, in America, I don't know, maybe you don't have it in England here, but in America, you can find a lot of people that their names, guy's name is Ali, was really Ali, became just Ali, Yusuf becomes Joe, this kind of thing, just to try to blend in, these people, of course, distorting Islamic names in this fashion would be considered, despicable.
You're talking about using short power attributes in collaboration, like as Rahim,
I've never heard of it being done before, again, one of the things we say when we try to choose names, we're not trying to choose the freakiest thing we can find, something that nobody else has ever done, this is not the Islamic way, really, in terms of, whatever we try to do of Islam, we don't try to go to some kind of extreme where we find something that's just, way out there, It's very important, Islamically speaking, although it's the same thing even in terms of how we conduct ourselves, right? That, although there are certain recommendations in terms of Islamic dress and things like this, that we don't take on Islamic dress, like a costume, for the truth value of it, it causes people to turn their eyes and whoa, this is that we don't dress on this side of, this is not, I'm just saying that this should not be our intention, and so if we choose, some Islamic attire, whatever, and our attire should at the same time be, in my view, should be neat, it shouldn't be, flashy colors and all this kind of, the same thing, modesty, shouldn't be fluffy. I mean, it's important that, I know some people go to a tailor, they want to put patches and, the thing is on iron, don't iron because sometimes didn't have an iron in his day, so they go in wrinkles, we see the Prophet Muhammad, he used to groom his hair and he told us about clipping fingernails and trimming the hair and combing the hair and, all these things, where the Muslim tries to keep himself in a good, neat, tidy fashion. It's a good example that even though he may be wearing a different kind of dress, people can appreciate, it's still neat and tidy. It's something, but where it's just like wrinkles and patches and, scruffs and, this is more like a hippie kind of, coming out of the hippie, Rasta kind of, rejection, social, these are extremes. You got to understand that these are extremes, this is not the norm. This is a breakaway from society. Let's not look what it represents. Let's break away. It's not natural at all. What they say is natural a lot. No, it's not natural. When you go to Africa, you don't find nobody like only mad people on the side of the road, madman, with locks, right? Otherwise, nobody carries locks like this at all. It's not the custom of the people of Africa at all. Really. It's very unnatural. So it's a distorted kind of this part of an whole rejection, the hippie movement. Because really, if you look at the rise of Rastafarian, culture and dress and this type of thing. This came around the 60s with the Western hippie rejection, what the hippies letting the clothes long and dragging and they hear stuff not bathing and all this stuff. This is part of the same kind of mentality. So this is not Islam. It's not really, those kind of extremes. Islam is just middle path. We take this middle path, moderate.